to maintain their rule more by coercion than by consent, precisely because the state is unable to access the resources that would constitute the necessary resources in order to have a proper, legitimate state. So that is the situation as I see it, and I have only 5 minutes, and that's very good. I think I'm doing pretty well. So the second point I want to make is that this process of separating Africa's resources and Africa's people, of rendering Africa's people redundant in the international division of labor, is also creating opportunities. And I'm saying that for the first time, African people now have, because you're not required, you're not demanded as slaves, you're not required as colonial labor, you've now got an opportunity to think about what you want to do with your labor. You have opportunities to reorganize, to rethink. And I'm saying this from an economic standpoint, that in the past, forms of production, commodities produced by Africa and Africans in general, have been to fulfill somebody else's requirements, somebody else's needs. African economies have never ventured to answer what I call the 3 basic economic questions: what to produce, for whom to produce, and how to produce. And I'm saying this new situation does create an opportunity for Africa to reposition itself and to redefine its structures and the composition of production. Now, there was a question of delinking, which came up here on the floor much earlier. I don't know how that fits in, but partly by responding just briefly to Sandra, that if the global system is disintegrating, delinking also means that the structural lock-ins that you are talking about are weakening. And therefore, if they are weakening, maybe delinking may not just be a choice, it might be the necessary outcome of this disintegration process. So it might be strategically good to prepare yourself to either jump or be pushed. And I've always believed that jumping guarantees you the possibility of landing on your feet. And being pushed, you could land on your head and have a major concussion, which Africa is risking. So what we do, I have things, this is basically a think piece. I have more or less mechanistically have 5 different challenges that I think Africa faces, and I call them the 5 R's. One is resource nationalism. I think we talked about Venezuela, Bolivia, and everybody has been talking about this emerging idea of resource nationalism. In the African context, it's important precisely because of what I've just said, that this process of alienating people from their resources. The young people that board these ships, which are carrying commodities to Europe, and they try to go along with the resources, and when they get to the border, they are separated. The iron and the gold and everything, they go in and they steal out and they're shipped backwards back into the continent. Resource nationalism, is that something that could also restructure our thinking? Regionalization, and this whole question about Pan-Africanism, African unity, I think it could not be more urgent than today. This is normally it's marginalized in academic discourse and left to the politicians, but I think what I'm proposing here is that we have to shift our thinking again in terms of how have we thought about regionalization, regional integration, African unity in the past, in the face of these current threats now. Can we rethink the Pan-Africanist project as a necessity rather than choice? So I've been working on things I call imperatives of integration, and I'm basically think about integration between choice and necessity, and I would like us to think that it's more, in the past we may have thought about it as choice, but now probably it imposes itself as necessity. Thirdly, revitalization, and I'm talking about rebuilding economic dynamism in the African setting. I think the African economies, you remember, at that time we used to call them inocomies. In other words, they work in any way but as economies. So again, can we rethink and reconceptualize the African economies? So there, revitalization, reinvigoration, I think a very important issue. I think if you look at our people, and we were discussing this, Darlene, yesterday, about bringing the people back in. And I think what has been lost, in my view, if you look at our villages, visit my village, they are in a state of decay, almost visible, that you can see people embarked upon a steady state of decay, progressive decay. And therefore, there is need somehow to re-energize, to reinvigorate our societies. And that's a major challenge. I do not have ways of saying it should be done this way or the other way, but I think the challenge includes how do we bring people back, from this marginalization process, this disintegration process, this polarization processes. How do you remobilize the people back and we create hope and the belief that there is a future and a better future at that. And finally, repositioning. And repositioning here, I think I borrow from an economist, Arthur Lewis. Arthur Lewis at one point, when he was talking about this idea of dual economies, and I think this was his Nobel Prize lecture, and he said that when countries or regions lose their particular economic space in the international division of labor, for example, your export commodity loses markets, saturation of markets, rise of substitutes, you name it, then the challenge is not to continue to produce the same thing at progressively less and less returns, but to actually turn away and produce something else. And as I said, I'm completing just like Arthur Lewis said, and he said, ultimately, the challenge is whether such countries can find the kind of visionary leadership that is necessary to be able to identify these new opportunities. Thank you very much.